A breakfast feast turned fatal. Who poisoned the pancakes? Welcome to Clue Hunt. I am your host Thornwick. Tell me where you're watching from. Your comments fuel this growing mystery-loving community. Let's crack open this case together. You ever wake up with the conviction that nothing peculiar is going to happen that day, and then get proved wrong before your eggs are cold? That was my Tuesday. The sky was the color of gilt gray, stubborn and heavy, and the atmosphere inside the brownstone matched it ounce for ounce. Fritz had just finished flipping a stack of pancakes that would make a man renounce cynicism when I heard the front doorbell. It was 9:03 a.m. that time of morning. It's either the mail, a mistake, or something that's about to cost us peace of mind. Wolfe doesn't acknowledge any of the above unless it comes wrapped in a case file and pays enough to offset the offense of being disturbed before lunch. I was halfway through my first pancake, apple cinnamon with a hint of nutmeg, when I heard Wolfe's voice floating from the dining room. "Archie." The door. I wiped my mouth, pushed back my chair, and went. There stood a woman in a tan raincoat, soaked shoulders, and eyes that had made up their mind about something unpleasant. Her lipstick had tried to be red, but was now the color of regret. She looked 40, gave the impression she'd been 39 for several years, and had the kind of poise that suggested she didn't ask for favors unless she was out of better options. "Miss," I said, "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent." She hesitated on the last word like it cost something to say. "They always are," I said. "Come in." She stepped into the foyer like it might bite her. I took her coat, dripping like a conspiracy, and showed her into the front room. Wolfe hadn't moved, of course. He was at the dining table, eyes narrowed at his plate as if the pancake had personally offended him. "This is Mr. Wolfe," I said. "If you've brought a problem, don't dress it up. He dislikes embroidery before orchids." She nodded, stepped forward, and spoke in a voice made for leading committees. "My name is Elaine Vetter. I run the Vetter House breakfast pantry in Midtown. We're a small but respected operation, and I believe someone is trying to kill me." Wolfe didn't blink. He didn't even look up. "What led you to that belief, madam?" His tone was as soft as whipped cream, but a lot less indulgent. She exhaled. "Yesterday, one of my chefs, Hector Gill, collapsed during prep. He was making pancakes, our special cinnamon cornmeal batch. He took a bite to taste the batter, as we all do. Within minutes, he was convulsing. He's in St. Brigid's now. They say it was poisoning." Wolfe moved a slice of pear with his fork. "And this concerns you, because I make that batter," she said. "But I didn't make that batch. I never touched it. And this morning I received a note, slid under my office door. It said, 'Next time, the poison won't miss you.' No signature." She produced a folded piece of paper and slid it onto the table like it was loaded. I stepped over and took a look. Block letters, clipped at the bottom, cheap copier ink, and no flair. The kind of threat made by someone who wanted to be taken seriously, but not identified. "And the police?" Wolfe asked. "They're investigating," she said. "But I know how these things go. The longer it takes, the more fingers point my way, and I can't afford suspicion. My reputation is my livelihood." Wolfe glanced at me, then just a flick of the eyes, but enough to signal a shift in air pressure. Something in this struck a nerve. I couldn't guess what yet. "Miss Vetter," he said slowly, "do you suspect someone specific?" "Yes," she replied, "and I suspect more than just sabotage. I think it's personal." "Everyone thinks it's personal when they're the target," I said. And she gave me a look that suggested I'd just stepped on her best shoes. Wolfe tapped his fingers on the table, a rare tick. "You wish me to investigate who attempted to poison your chef, and by implication you." "Yes, discreetly, quietly, before this becomes public." Wolfe leaned back, letting his bulk settle like a verdict. "Phooey, I dislike restaurants, Miss Vetter, and I dislike amateur dramatics. Yet, Archie, yes, sir, get Mr. Gill's hospital report, and begin with the kitchen staff. Make it clear you are not a health inspector." I raised a brow. "We're taking the case." His eyes closed. "Yes, the motive will reveal itself, and it has flavor." He resumed eating. That was Wolfe speak, for I'm interested, even if he didn't yet know why. I saw the hint of something flicker. Behind his words, curiosity mixed with something else. Maybe the use of cinnamon had struck a nerve. Or maybe it was the intrusion into his breakfast that gave this matter weight. Elaine Vedder nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe." He didn't reply. He was already considering something no one else could see, and I had just been assigned to find out who put poison in a pancake. I left Wolfe to his pear slices and philosophical silence, grabbed my coat from the stand, and slid the folded note from Miss Vedder into my inside pocket. She lingered by the door, watching Wolfe as if expecting a benediction. She got none. I held the door open for her and waited. Outside, the rain had tapered to a drizzle, the kind that makes you doubt whether it's worth raising your collar or just admitting defeat. I walked her to the curb where a cab waited, the engine grumbling like a hungry cat. "I'll be in touch," I told her. She nodded. "I have nothing to hide, Mr. Goodwin. But some of the people I work with, they might." The cab rolled off, tires whispering against the wet asphalt. I stood for a second watching the taillights blur into the mist, then turned back toward the brownstone to get the car. Hospital visits aren't my favorite pastime, especially when they involve food poisoning victims who might vomit mid-sentence. But Wolfe had made the call, so I drove uptown to St. Bridget's, a blocky mid-century institution with a lobby full of over-polished tile and underpaid receptionists. After some mild persuasion, which included charm to phone calls and a fabricated relation to the patient, I got access to Hector Gill. He looked like he'd been dragged backward through the digestive process, pale, trembling, wires stuck to him like someone had tried to turn him into a lamp. But his eyes were clear, and when I introduced myself and gave him Wolfe's name, something flickered behind the lids. "Miss Vedder sent you," he croaked. "More or less," I said. "She thinks someone was gunning for her, but you took the bullet." He blinked. "I didn't think I was dying. I just thought it was bad batter." "Well, someone disagrees. Tell me about the pancakes." Hector exhaled. "It was a new batch. We'd been rotating chefs on specialty prep. Elaine wanted more cross-training. That morning, I volunteered to do the cinnamon cornmeal. It's her signature, and I wanted to prove I could handle it. Batter was already mixed in a covered bowl. Said her assistant, Jonah, had prepped it an hour earlier. Jonah who? Jonah Drake, ex-pastry. New to the team, good hands, quiet. I made a mental note. I took one taste of the raw mix. Hector went on, and 5 minutes later, my legs turned to rubber. I don't remember much after that. Could you smell anything off? Bitter almonds, bleach, snake venom. He gave a weak smile. I'm a chef, not a bloodhound, right? Anyone acting strange that morning? His eyes drifted toward the window. Elaine was edgy. She gets that way when reviewers are booked, especially that food blogger. Mira Kelton. She's vicious when underwhelmed. She at the restaurant that morning. She had a reservation, but never showed. That got filed too. I thanked him, promised him nothing, and left. Back at the pancake pantry, which, let me tell you, sounds cute until you realize the business of breakfast is dead serious. In Midtown, I walked into a space that smelled like butter and tension. The dining room had sleek wood tables, open brick walls, and a curated folksy charm that probably took 10 designers to look accidental. Behind the counter was a lean kid with hair like he'd styled it using a whisk. "Help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for Jonah Drake," I said. He paused just long enough to confirm guilt or curiosity. "He's in the back. I can get him. Tell him Archie Goodwin. I'm not a cop, not a health inspector, and I don't carry a clipboard." Jonah appeared 2 minutes later, late 20s, flour-dusted apron, nervous hands. A type I've seen before, skilled, underpaid, and wondering which career mistake just caught up with him. I didn't poison anyone, he said before I'd opened my mouth. That's great, I said, but I'm more interested in who might have. You made the batter, I prepped the dry mix. Elaine said she'd add the wet ingredients herself. She told me she hadn't touched it. He hesitated. Then maybe I'm wrong. You strike me as the kind of guy who doesn't misremember details when poison's involved. Jonah folded his arms. Okay, I didn't see her do it, but she was near it, and she's the only one who ever adjusts the spices. She guards that mix like it's a bank vault. Anyone else handle it? No, unless someone snuck in early. Does that happen? He hesitated again. It could. Elaine has a key. Her assistant, Steph, does too. So does Mira, the blogger. He nodded. She's more than that. She's kind of an investor, silent partner. But Elaine doesn't like anyone to know. Interesting silence. She ever caused trouble here? He smiled grimly. She's threatened to pull funding 3 times this year. Says the quality's slipping, that we're diluting the essence. Whatever that means, it meant I had a new suspect. Back in the car, I dialed Saul Panzer. If Mira Kelton had money in the place and enemies among the staff, he could dig it up faster than a hungry ferret. I gave him the basics and hung up. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had retired to the plant rooms with Theodore. The rain had stopped. I updated Fritz in the kitchen, who raised an eyebrow at the mention of cinnamon poisoning. Bitter. Cassia can mimic cinnamon, he said. In large amounts, it's toxic. That gave me a chill. Fritz wasn't prone to dramatics. If he was worried about a spice, it was worth paying attention. Wolfe emerged at 6 sharp for dinner, as immovable and unreadable as a Roman statue. At the table, I gave him my rundown: Gil, Jonah, Mira, and the mention of a possible ingredient. Swap. Wolfe chewed a morsel of braised rabbit, swallowed, and said, deliberate substitution implies access, knowledge, and motive, which points to someone who knows the mix, hates Elaine, and maybe had a reason to throw suspicion on her. He nodded. Your next step is Mira Kelton. Discover her intent, not her opinion. There's a difference. I can't promise she'll be honest. No. But honesty is not always required. Truth can be extracted through omission and contradiction. He took another bite. That was the end of dinner talk. Later that night, Saul called. His voice was as dry as an old file cabinet. Mira Kelton was sued 2 years ago by a rival chef. He said, defamation. She won, but her reputation's messy. She invests in boutique restaurants and then applies pressure-pulling funding when things don't go her way. And Elaine, she's had 2 other business ventures. One folded. One was taken from her by a former partner. Guess who represented the partner in court? Mira Kelton. Bingo. I thanked him and hung up. We were looking less like a pancake incident and more like a slow-brewed revenge plot. The question was who was doing the cooking. Wolfe didn't speak again until we were both in the office, the yellow glow of the desk lamp pulling long shadows across the walls. She came to us. He said finally, Elaine? Yes, which implies either innocence or strategic desperation. I leaned back on the couch. I'll poke at Mira in the morning, see what kind of syrup she bleeds. He grunted. Do. And inquire after the spices used. Something was altered. I nodded. You think it was done here? Wolfe didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fact that the note had found its way under Elaine's office door without witnesses said enough. Someone had access, motive, and the kind of nerve it takes to lace breakfast with poison. And now, they were on Wolfe's menu. Tomorrow, the butter wouldn't melt, but the truth just might. The next morning broke without ceremony. No calls, no rain. Just a dull overcast that hung over the city like an unpaid bill. Wolfe was already settled in his chair by the time I came down, engrossed in a volume of something Latin and joyless. I gave him a short nod, got a grunt in return, and headed out. Mira Kelton wasn't hard to find. She had an apartment in Soho, sharp lines, big windows, and the kind of decor that tries to scream minimalist but whispers tax bracket. She greeted me in a fitted robe and an expression that suggested she'd only allow an interruption if it came with compliments or legal documents. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, holding the door with one manicured hand. "I was told you'd be charming. I can be. But today I am working." I flashed her Wolfe's card and stepped inside before the charm had a chance to wear off. The place smelled like expensive candles and dried orchids. She led me into a sleek, white-walled sitting room and perched herself like a cat on a mid-century chair. "So," she said, tilting her head, "this is about pancakes?" "This is about motive," I said. "You're an investor in Vetterhouse, that right?" Her lips curled. "A silent investor. Though these days the silence is mostly on my part. Elaine rarely listens. You were scheduled to eat there. The day of the incident. You didn't show. I had a meeting run long. My apologies to the Flapjacks. I didn't smile. The same morning, a chef nearly died. Poison. You know anything about that?" She looked genuinely surprised. Maybe she was a better actress than I'd pegged. I'd heard something about food poisoning. I assumed it was unfortunate produce. Doctors say otherwise. And Elaine got a note afterward, threatening. "Know anything about that?" Now she laughed, dry and tight. "Are you suggesting I threatened my own business?" "I'm suggesting you've threatened to pull funding before. You've sued people. You were involved in a previous legal dispute with Elaine. That," she said, crossing her legs with precision, "was business. Elaine underperformed. I backed her because I believed in her culinary instincts, not her ability to manage egos or invoices. Sounds like love at first bite." Mira didn't blink. "Look, I've had disagreements with Elaine. But poison, that's amateur hour. I don't sabotage investments, I strangle them cleanly with contracts and performance clauses, not kitchen tricks. Did you ever have access to the kitchen before ours?" "I have a key. I've dropped in on occasion, but not recently. Anyone else know that?" She gave a light shrug. "Probably Jonah, maybe Steph. Steph, Elaine's assistant. Very loyal. A little too loyal, if you ask me." I filed that away. "And you don't like the cinnamon cornmeal?" She wrinkled her nose. "It's overspiced. She insists on that awful cassia blend. It's a taste war she won't surrender. I suspect she values her ego more than her palate." That was all I needed for now. I thanked her blandly and left her lounging in her minimalist kingdom. Back in the car, I called Wolfe. "She's articulate, scathing, and hates cassia," I said. "Then she has taste," Wolfe said. "And did she deny access? Claim she hasn't visited recently. Blamed Elaine's pride. Said sabotages beneath her." Wolfe grunted. "Anyone with that much vanity is never beneath anything. Return here. We need to consider Steph." I parked in front of the brownstone 40 minutes later. Fritz was making chicken stock in the kitchen and gave me a look like he knew this would be one of those cases that spoil the week's rhythm. I grabbed coffee and joined Wolfe in the office. "She mentioned Steph," I said. "Elaine's assistant. Loyal type. Too loyal, according to Mira," Wolfe said. "That bears examining. Contact her. Invite her here on pretense of clarifying the timeline. That's a polite way to say bait her." He lifted a brow. "Yes, be courteous." I found Steph's number in the restaurant's directory. She answered quickly, voice brisk and efficient, like someone mid-spreadsheet. "This is Stephanie Ward. Miss Ward. This is Archie Goodwin, assistant to Nero Wolfe, Mr. Wolfwood. Like a few clarifications regarding the morning of the incident. Would you be willing to visit the brownstone today?" A pause. "I can do that. 2 o'clock. Ring the bell. We'll be waiting." She arrived on time, dressed in a navy blazer and practical heels. Her brown hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She shook my hand firmly, her grip neither apologetic nor aggressive. Wolfe stayed seated when she entered, as always, and motioned toward the red chair without greeting. "I understand you're Elaine Vedder's assistant," he said. "You were present the morning of the poisoning." "Yes. I opened with her at 6:30 a.m. Hector arrived at 7:15. He started prep around 7:30. Who had access to the batter?" She tilted her head. "Jonah prepped the dry mix. Elaine usually adds the wet components herself." "But did she?" "I assumed so." "You saw her do it?" "No," she admitted. "I was checking inventory." "Anyone else in the kitchen?" She paused. Mira dropped in briefly. She left before prep started. Wolfe's eyes flickered. "Describe her demeanor." "Impatient. She asked for the last week's sales and said we needed to refocus the brand. She left before." "Hector began mixing. And did you notice anything unusual? A misplaced container? An odd smell?" "No." She said, "Except, yes, I thought the batter looked a little darker than usual. I didn't think much of it. We use different flours sometimes." Wolfe nodded slowly. "Miss Ward, do you have keys to the premises?" "Yes, Elaine, Jonah, Mira, and I do." "Has there been any suggestion among the staff that Elaine's leadership is compromised?" Her back straightened. "She's under pressure, yes, but she's talented. What happened wasn't her fault." "That is not what I asked." She hesitated. "Some think she's slipping, but I don't." "Very good. That's all." She rose slowly. "Mr. Wolfe, do you think someone's trying to destroy the business?" Wolfe's lips twitched. "Someone is certainly trying to season it." She left, puzzled, when the door closed. Wolfe looked at me. "She's loyal." And frightened. She lied she saw something, but didn't want to implicate Elaine. "We must now confirm what the poison was." I nodded. "You think it was cassia?" "I think someone swapped it for a toxic variant intentionally. That requires both knowledge and a reason to strike indirectly." "Mira, possibly. But Miss Vedder had enemies before Mira." Wolfe rose a rare sight and walked to the window. "Ask Fritz to retrieve the cassia jar from our own pantry," he said. "Then call a toxicologist. I want the variant compared. If it's coumarin heavy, we're looking at deliberate substitution, and only someone intimate with that spice would know the precise effect." I stood, heart ticking a little faster. We were moving from kitchen mishap to culinary sabotage with enough motive to go around. "You're thinking it wasn't aimed at Elaine?" "No," Wolfe said. "It was aimed at Hector. The question is why." That hung in the air. Outside, the clouds thickened again. Rain was coming, and someone's recipe for revenge was just beginning to simmer. Fritz delivered the cassia jar like it was an object of reverence, wrapped in a linen towel and cradled in both hands. He placed it on Wolfe's desk with a caution, usually reserved for Sofels or Fabergé eggs. Wolfe didn't touch it. He only leaned slightly forward in his chair and stared at the label. "Organic cassia," I read aloud, "hand ground. Supplier, Belcourt Spice & Co." Wolfe made a face as if the jar had belched. "That's not the variety Fritz uses," he said. "Ours is Ceylon cinnamon. This is common cassia, thicker bark, higher coumarin levels, cheaper. It may also be poisonous, depending on dosage." Fritz nodded. "I saw that label once at Vedder House, on a delivery box." I raised an eyebrow. "So they source from Belcourt too, apparently." Wolfe said, "But the danger lies in substitution. A ground spice may carry any number of adulterants, especially if repackaged. Contact Belcourt. Ask if they've had any recent recalls or complaints, and Archie be circumspect. If the culprit suspects we're tracing the spice, they may try to interfere." I made the call. The clerk at Belcourt was helpful until he smelled a problem, then suddenly became professional and vague. After I dropped Wolfe's name, which carries more weight in certain circles, Then a search warrant. I got bumped to the quality control manager, a guy named Harmon Ellery who had a voice like a tax form. No recalls on the cashier, he said. But there was an inquiry last week. Anonymous asked if our grind might contain Cinnamomum burmani instead of Cinnamomum cassia. Would that make a difference? I asked. A significant one, he said. Burmani has higher coumarin content. Too much can cause liver toxicity, especially if someone replaces a small amount of premium cassia with it. Any idea? Who made the inquiry? No name, just a number. I still have it. Want it? I did. He read it out. I scribbled it down, thanked him, and rang off. Then I called a favor with Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon can track a phone number faster than a newsroom cat can find a saucer of scandal. He got back to me in 10 minutes. Belongs to a prepaid cell, Lon said. Registered to a Mira K. I didn't respond right away. I was too busy digesting. That twist, you sure? As sure as I am that your guy Wolfe will never return my calls. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. Mira asked about the spice. He closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. So, not entirely innocent. But doesn't mean she did the deed. Could just be snooping. She invested in the restaurant. Her concern for quality might be genuine, or it might be camouflage. Maybe both. Find Mira. Wolfe said, ask why she made the inquiry, but do not let on we've confirmed it was her. I did one better. I caught her at Vetter House. She was sitting in the far corner of the dining room, tapping away at her phone with the kind of focus that suggested she was composing either a scathing review or a declaration of war. Elaine was nowhere in sight, but Jonah stood nearby, nervously straightening jars on a shelf that didn't need straightening. I slid into the seat across from Mira and gave her my best toothy smile. Miss Kelton, you remember me? I do, she said without looking up. You're the one who asked if I poisoned the pancakes. I asked if you knew anything about it. Turns out, you made a call about cassia to the supplier. She looked up, slowly, and her eyes narrowed. You've been busy, she said. So have you. Her gaze sharpened, but she didn't blink. I wanted to confirm something. Jonah claimed the flavor was off last week. I thought maybe they'd cheaped out on the spice. Why not just ask Elaine? She gave a dry laugh. Elaine's defensive. Always has been. Ask her if the sun is out and she'll give you a dissertation on cloud cover. Still, I said, leaning in, your timing's interesting. You make that call days before someone ends up in the hospital, and then a threat shows up. That just coincidence? Mira paused. No, she said finally. I was tipped off. That got my attention. By who? I don't know. I got a message, no name. Said I should look into the cassia shipment at Vetter House before someone regrets it. I assumed it was a disgruntled employee. You kept this to yourself. I didn't want to start a panic over bad seasoning. Someone nearly died. She frowned. You think I did this? I think you're in the middle of it, one way or another. Then find out who sent the message, she snapped, then caught herself. Sorry, but I didn't poison anyone. If someone's trying to undermine Elaine, they're doing it with precision. I left her with that thought. Outside, I called Saul Panzer and asked him to dig into employee phone records, specifically Jonah, Steph, and anyone else with a grudge and a data plan. If someone anonymously tipped Mira, the sender had to be inside, back at the brownstone. Wolfe had already assembled his thoughts into a grid, literally. He had taken to sketching out suspects on a yellow pad, connecting motive, access, and knowledge. With lines that looked like a subway map, Mira may have been manipulated, he said. Or she may be manipulating. I believe her, I said. She's conniving, but she didn't look scared. She looked irritated. That doesn't match guilt. It matches surprise. That leaves Steph, Wolfe murmured, or Jonah, or perhaps Elaine herself. She called us, remember? Yes, to appear innocent, perhaps to control the narrative. She knew Hector would survive. She may have counted on that. That was a Wolfe theory, cynical and precise. The phone rang. I picked it up. It was Saul. "Got something," he said. "Jonah's phone sent a text 3 days ago to a number registered under a Mira Kelton. Alias message was deleted. Timestamp. Matches Belcourt's inquiry. That's our ghostwriter," I said. "Want me to keep on him?" "Not yet. I think it's time Jonah had a chat with Mr. Wolfe." I hung up and looked at the man himself. Jonah tipped Mira. "Then let us invite Jonah Drake to dinner," Wolfe said. "I wish to speak with him in my own kitchen, where spices are sacred and no deceit survives the heat." There was something chilling in his tone. Not anger. Wolfe rarely wasted time on emotion. It was the certainty that the lie was almost undone, the trap almost closed. I made the call. Jonah agreed to come at 7. By then, the table would be set, and Wolfe would be ready to stir the truth from the bottom of the pot. Jonah Drake arrived at 7 sharp, wearing the kind of button-up shirt that tries too hard to say casual. Sleeves rolled and collar slightly wilted. He looked like he'd spent the last hour arguing with his own reflection. I opened the door, ushered him in with a neutral nod, and led him through the brownstone, past the dining room empty save for the clinking prep of Fritz, and into the office, where Wolfe sat amid lamplight and leather, the room exhaling the scent of worn books and slow judgment. Wolfe didn't rise. He rarely did. He gestured toward the red chair, which Jonah eyed with suspicion before sitting down like it might recline into an interrogation chamber. "Mr. Drake," Wolfe said, steepling his fingers. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Goodwin and I have been examining the circumstances of the recent unpleasantness at Vedder House." Jonah gave a tight smile. "I figured. When Archie Mr. Goodwin called, I had a feeling it wasn't about spice appreciation." Wolfe ignored that. "We know someone substituted toxic cassia into the pancake batter. We also know that you sent an anonymous message to Miss Kelton, prompting her to inquire about the supplier. That is an unusual step for an employee." Jonah stiffened, just enough for me to notice. I was worried. I thought the spice might have been contaminated. I didn't want to make a public accusation. Mira's an investor. I figured she'd know what to do. You hoped she would report it discreetly, without implicating you? He hesitated. "Yes." Wolfe's tone was mild, yet the note arrived after Hector's poisoning. The substitution must have occurred before the batter was used, meaning someone had knowledge, access, and intent. "What was your intent?" Jonah looked at me, then back at Wolfe. "I didn't poison anyone. You had the opportunity. You prepped the dry mix." "Yes, but Elaine usually finishes it." "I thought she did that day." "She claims she did not." Jonah ran a hand through his hair. "Then I don't know who did. I swear. I thought maybe Steph had. Miss Ward is loyal to Miss Vedder. You, however, appear loyal to no one." That landed. Jonah sank a little lower in the chair. "I didn't want anyone hurt," he said. I thought Hector was trying to get me fired." That pricked Wolfe's curiosity like a thorn. "Explain." "He's Elaine's favorite. Every time I made a new dish, he'd adjust it, said it needed more balance, but he'd change it just enough to make it taste off. Then Elaine would blame me. I lost 3 weekend menus that way. She started talking about cutting staff. And your solution," Wolfe said coldly, "was to poison a batter he might use." "No, that wasn't me. I thought maybe if I got Mira involved, she'd push for a change in leadership. Maybe Elaine would rethink the team structure. That's all." Wolfe let the silence stretch like dough across a countertop. "Your logic," he said finally, "is unconvincing and your methods absurd. You were used. The real culprit planted the substitution, and you perhaps through misplaced suspicion or ambition sent a warning to the wrong person, unintentionally shielding the one responsible." Jonah said nothing. He looked like a man realizing he'd opened a door for a stranger and just watched them walk out. With his furniture, Wolfe gestured toward the hallway. You will remain in the front room while we conclude our inquiries. Fritz will bring you coffee. Jonah rose, defeated, and left the office. I waited until the door clicked shut. Well, I said, you think he's guilty? No. But he is a fool, and that often serves the same purpose. He had motive, resentment, weak ethics. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but not the spine. He didn't plan this. Someone else did. Someone who knew Jonah's weakness and used it. I crossed my arms. Elaine, possible, but unlikely. She is too proud, and pride doesn't lend itself to subtlety. Then Steph. She would never risk Elaine's career unless Elaine betrayed her trust first. Wolfe closed his eyes, a signal I'd come to recognize. He was peeling the outer layer from the truth. She noticed the batter was darker. She said nothing. That, too, was loyalty or fear. I frowned. You want to talk to her again? No. Not yet. First, we test her truth. Archie, call Fritz. Ask him to prepare 2 samples of pancake batter, one with cassia from our jar, and one with the cassia delivered to Vetter House. Then invite Steph for tasting. I blinked. You're using her palate to test her guilt. I'm using her nerves to test her loyalty. Wolfe said. Half an hour later, Steph Ward stood at our kitchen table, looking equal parts confused and concerned. Fritz presented the 2 batters in silver ramekins, alongside crisp, quartered pancakes that looked innocent as kittens. Wolfe remained in the kitchen doorway, arms folded like a magistrate at a food trial. Miss Ward, he said, you are to taste both and tell. U.S. which was used the morning Hector Gill was poisoned. Steph glanced between the plates. I'm not trained for this. You've eaten those pancakes hundreds of times, and you remarked the batter looked darker than usual. Trust your senses. She took a breath, stepped forward, and tasted the first, then the second. The spoon paused midway between mouth and plate after the second taste. This one, she said quietly. It's the one from that morning. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. What makes you so certain? The aftertaste. It's bitter. Not just spice bitter. There's something wrong. And you noticed that on the day of the incident. She didn't answer. Wolfe pressed on. You lied to protect Miss Vetter. Did you also lie to protect yourself? No. She said, louder than she intended. I thought she had made the batter. I didn't want anyone questioning her judgment. We've worked together for years through her divorce, the restaurant losses, everything. I stepped closer. So if she didn't make the batter and Jonah says he didn't finish it, then who did? Steph's lips parted slightly, then closed again. I don't know, she said. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. Miss Ward, be aware, silence can be complicity. She swallowed. All I know is, Hector had access that morning. He was alone for 10 minutes before the prep began. Jonah went to take a call, and I was with a delivery. I raised an eyebrow. So you're saying Hector poisoned himself? No. I'm saying he had a key to Elaine's office. He could have taken anything from her shelves. She keeps her own spice rack in there. I glanced at Wolfe. He said nothing, but his eyes gleamed. Archie, he said, retrieve Miss Vetter. We will hold the gathering tomorrow at 10. All parties present. I nodded. You think Hector spiced his own food? I think, Wolfe said, that we have been misled, not by lies, by assumptions. Tomorrow, the aroma of deception will meet fresh air. Steph excused herself quickly. I didn't stop her. Wolfe remained in the kitchen a moment longer, staring at the ramekin of bitter batter as though it held the key to the whole human condition. Fritz, he murmured, the poison wasn't hidden in the cassia. It was masked by it. Fritz's brow furrowed, concealed in the spice itself. Exactly. Something with a similar aroma. Something Hector wouldn't question. I whistled low. Then this wasn't carelessness. No, Wolfe said. This was choreography. And tomorrow we would gather the dancers, one of whom had just performed their last step. At precisely 10 o'clock the next morning, the brownstone became a stage. The office had been rearranged subtly just enough to suggest intention. Wolfe sat in his usual throne of logic, behind his desk, flanked by two side chairs angled for visibility. The guests, summoned individually, but now united by curiosity, were arranged in a semicircle. Elaine Vedder, tense and upright, Mira Kelton, arms crossed and nostrils slightly flared, Jonah Drake, eyes darting, and Steph Ward, quieter than usual but dry-eyed and observant. The only one missing was Hector Gill, still recovering in the hospital, but now more central to the proceedings than any of them. Wolfe surveyed them like a botanist examining a cluster of withered specimens. "I have convened this meeting," he began, "because the incident at Vedder House was not an accident, nor a mishap, nor culinary negligence. It was a crime, one designed not merely to harm, but to manipulate." Elaine tensed. Manipulate what? Perception. Wolfe said, control of the narrative, and ultimately of the restaurant. Mira let out a short, elegant scoff. "That's absurd." "No." Wolfe replied, his voice still as a cleaver. "It is precise. I stood at the back of the room, notebook in hand, watching the dominoes align. Let us begin with what we know," Wolfe said. A batch of pancake batter was laced with a toxic variant of cassia, known to contain high concentrations of coumarin. This variant was not part of the restaurant's official supply. It was introduced into the mix by someone with access, intent, and a working knowledge of how flavor can mask danger. His gaze slid to Jonah. Mr. Drake prepared the dry mix, however, he did not add the spice. Nor did Miss Vedder, despite what was initially assumed. Elaine blinked. "But I didn't." "Yes." Wolfe cut in. "You claimed you never touched the batter, but Jonah believed you had. Steph observed you near it but didn't witness the actual act. That ambiguity was exploited. The result? Suspicion fell, subtly and conveniently, on the one person whose reputation could not afford it. You." Elaine's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Wolfe turned to Mira. "Miss Kelton, you were sent an anonymous message directing your attention to the cassia supply. You then called Belcourt Spices, inquiring whether the grind might contain toxic variants." "I did," Mira said, tightly. "But the message you received," Wolfe went on, "was not from a whistleblower. It was bait. You were being maneuvered to cast a shadow over Miss Vedder without realizing you'd been used." Jonah looked like he wanted to disappear into his collar. Mira gave a curt nod. "I was set up." Wolfe shifted to Steph. "Miss Ward, you were the only person who noticed the batter looked darker than usual. Yet you remained silent to protect Miss Vedder's reputation. A commendable act of loyalty. But your silence also served the saboteur's plan by allowing the tampering to go unchallenged. Until it was too late." Steph flushed, but said nothing. Wolfe sat back, folding his hands. "The identity of the saboteur," he said, "has been hidden not by absence of motive, but by presence of design. Each of you was meant to serve a role. Jonah, the careless employee; Mira, the sharp-tongued investor; Steph, the blind loyalist; Elaine, the distracted leader. The true culprit relied on those roles to misdirect attention and did so successfully." He paused, and the poison, he continued, was not simply cassia. It was a compound hidden within it, a liver toxin, almost odorless, indistinguishable when combined with bitter cinnamon. The delivery method, a specialty jar, taken not from the kitchen, but from Elaine Vedder's personal stash stored in her office. Elaine frowned. "I keep my spices locked, and Hector Gill had a key," Wolfe finished. "That is correct. And Hector Gill was alone with that office the morning of the incident." A stunned silence. Mira leaned forward. "You're saying Hector poisoned himself?" Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "No, I am saying Hector arranged for the batter to be poisoned, intending that someone else, likely Jonah, would take the fall. But something went wrong. He tasted the batter himself, perhaps out of reflex, and suffered the very fate he planned for another. Jonah looked like someone had struck him. He hated me, he whispered. But why would he? Because, Wolfe said, he wished to orchestrate your removal, to provoke Mira into pushing Elaine aside, to create instability within the staff. And once that happened, he could step in not as the chef who nearly died, but as the victim-turned-savior, the martyr who exposed a broken system. Elaine's voice cracked. He would never. He's worked with me for 7 years, Wolfe said, long enough to watch your confidence falter, long enough to believe he deserved more authority than you allowed. I spoke to the hospital this morning. He is recovering. Yes, but the toxins in his system were present in trace amounts. Not enough to kill, just enough to appear poisoned. He diluted the dose. That silenced the room. I stepped forward. We found traces of the compound in an unmarked spice jar, hidden in the back of Elaine's office, wiped down. But the labs, running prints. Wolfe looked at Elaine. He used your trust against you, your kitchen, your spice, your fatigue. That is betrayal of the highest order. Elaine sat very still. Her fingers tightened on the edge of her chair. Mira was the first to speak. What happens now? Wolfe sniffed. That depends on your appetite for justice. If you pursue a formal complaint, Hector will be charged with attempted poisoning. If you prefer discretion, you may extract resignation publicly positioned as health-related. Elaine's lips trembled. I need to think. You should, Wolfe said. A restaurant is more than recipes. It is trust, loyalty, and control. All of which Hector tried to steal, not for malice, for ambition. Silence again. Then Steph exhaled. I saw him in the office that morning, she said quietly. I didn't think anything of it. You weren't meant to, Wolfe replied. He counted on that. Jonah shook his head. I can't believe I helped him. You didn't, Wolfe said. You were played. But remember, when you play with shadows, you risk becoming one. That line hung in the air. I stepped forward again. If you'd like, I'll coordinate with your lawyers. We can arrange a statement. Elaine nodded slowly, eyes unfocused. Wolfe stood surprising everyone and walked to the door. That concludes our discussion, he said. You may leave, all of you. They filed out, stunned and slow, like people waking from a shared dream. I watched from the hall as Elaine paused at the threshold, turned, and whispered something I didn't catch. Wolfe didn't respond. He simply returned to his chair. Later, as Fritz brought in lunch veal chops and buttered green beans, I handed Wolfe a glass of beer and asked the question hanging in the air. Why didn't you tell her sooner? She wasn't ready. Wolfe said, when a betrayal is personal, the truth must be delivered slowly, like a sauce reduced over low heat, or it curdles. He took a bite. And now, he said, we dine. I grinned, flipped my notebook closed, and reached for the beans. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the brownstone had returned to its natural state, ordered, quiet, and filled with the scent of vindication. And somewhere, a batch of pancakes had finally been cleared of suspicion. The morning after the gathering, peace held in the brownstone like a freshly ironed tablecloth, flat, clean, undisturbed. Wolfe, having put a moral bookend on the pancake debacle, had resumed his natural state of controlled inertia. That meant orchids in the morning, books by noon, and a firm refusal to be addressed during either. I, on the other hand, had the cleanup job. Not literal. Fritz had that covered, but the calls, the clarifications, and the careful application of social varnish to a story that would otherwise attract flies. Elaine Vetter had decided, for now, to avoid pressing charges officially. Hector's incident would be deemed a medical event pending evaluation unofficially. He was being eased out of Vetter House with a severance package and a warning smile from Mira. Kelton. The media hadn't picked up on it yet, thanks to Mira's discretion and a strategically delayed health inspection report. But rumors were like batter. They spread if you weren't careful. So I spent the better part of the morning fielding polite denials and massaging egos over the phone. By noon, I was at my desk flipping through notes when the phone rang. Not the private line, the front line, the one reserved for new clients, lost tourists, and the occasional angry vendor. Brownstone, I said that the voice on the other end was calm. Female, a little too calm. This is Stephanie Ward. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. I straightened slightly. Miss Ward, you're lucky it's lunchtime. Try at 3 and you'd be excommunicated. She didn't laugh. It's important. Of course it is, I said. But is it urgent? Yes, she said, because I think I made a mistake. I told her to come by at 2 and hung up. When I broke the news to Wolfe between bites of veal pate, he gave me the same expression he uses when Fritz overcooks the eggs, mild disappointment seasoned with resignation. She was uncommonly silent during yesterday's gathering, he murmured, and yet she was the first to name Hector. You think she regrets it? I think regret and guilt are often confused. We shall see which one she brings. At 2 sharp, Steph returned to the brownstone. Her hair was looser this time, pulled back but not tightly, and her coat was folded over one arm like she wasn't sure if she meant to stay. Her face wore fatigue the way some people wear jewelry deliberately. We brought her into the office. Miss Ward, Wolfe said without preamble, you've reconsidered something. Yes, she said, sitting, and I don't know what to do with it. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. Then start with the truth. She took a breath. Yesterday, when you laid it all out, I wanted it to be Hector. I really did. Because that would make sense. He had the motive, the access. But last night I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about one thing. Wolfe didn't prompt her. He waited. She continued. The spice jar, the one you found in Elaine's office, it wasn't hers. That pulled Wolfe's gaze up from the desk. She told me once months ago that she hated the Belcourt label, said it looked cheap. She always ordered from a small supplier in Vermont. Her private stash had green labels, not red. Why didn't you say this yesterday? Because I was afraid it would implicate someone else. Who? Steph hesitated. Me. Wolfe's voice was soft. Explain. I ordered that Belcourt cassia. For myself. I use it at home. I wanted to improve my palate, train my taste for spice balance. I brought a jar into work one morning by mistake, and I must have left it in the kitchen. When I realized, I didn't think anything of it, but it must have been taken. Someone moved it to Elaine's office and used it. That was when? A week before the poisoning. I glanced at Wolfe. He tapped a knuckle on the desk. You told no one. I was embarrassed. And after what happened, I didn't connect it until last night. Did anyone else know about the jar? No. I thought it had been tossed or lost. But now, she swallowed. I think someone planted it to make it look like Elaine poisoned her own chef. Wolfe's brows creased faintly. Then the deception is more elaborate than I judged, he murmured, and the motive less about elimination and more about control. He turned his gaze on Steph. You said yesterday that Hector had a key to Elaine's office, but who else had access to it? Just me, and Elaine, of course, and you. Never questioned the change in jar. I assumed someone had moved it for convenience. Wolfe exhaled. So we returned to a jar that was moved, a spice that was swapped, and a narrative that was staged. I stepped forward. But if Steph didn't do it, and Hector didn't have the right jar, that leaves Elaine, Wolfe said quietly, or someone who wanted it to look like Elaine, someone who knew Hector would taste the batter, someone who wanted Hector to fall ill just enough to shock, not enough to die, and who would benefit from Hector's fall. We both turned to Steph. Her face was white. No, she said. I didn't. I mean, I never. Wolfe raised a hand. I am not accusing you, Miss Ward, but I must ask, did you ever feel overlooked? Tears welled, but didn't fall. She trusted Hector with everything. Even when I did the numbers, managed the schedules, caught every supply error, He got the thanks. I got the late nights. Then you had motive, Wolfe said gently, an opportunity. Steph shook her head. No, I swear, I was angry. But not that angry, perhaps, Wolfe murmured. But someone was. He leaned back, fingers tented. There is one possibility we haven't explored. Someone who manipulated the entire situation without ever touching the batter. You mean Mira, I said. Wolfe didn't reply. He didn't have to. The conclusion was taking shape, slow and terrible. Miss Ward, he said. Would you be willing to testify if needed regarding the jar? She looked up, surprised. You think it will come to that? It may. If the person who planted it realizes the frame is cracking. Steph nodded, slowly. I will. She left shortly after, wrapped in a kind of quiet that didn't come from fear but from finally telling something that had grown too big to keep. I turned to Wolfe. You're thinking Mira orchestrated the whole thing? Yes, but how? She arranged for the chaos, he said, not the poison. She didn't need to know the outcome, only that instability would follow. Jonah's anonymous message. She may have encouraged it. Hector's ambition. She may have fed it. Steph's forgotten jar. She exploited it. But if Hector planned to poison Jonah, I said, then why would Mira let that play out? Because if he succeeded, she could have both chaos and an opening to remove Elaine. If he failed, if something went wrong, Elaine still bore the brunt. That's diabolical. It's business, Wolfe said, and she plays it with a butcher's knife. We sat in silence. Then Wolfe said, tomorrow, call her. She will come, and this time, she will answer properly. I nodded. The trap was set. And Mira Kelton, silent partner and silent puppeteer, had just run out of strings. Mira Kelton arrived at 11 the next morning. She wore black, perfectly tailored slacks, a silk blouse, and a blazer with sleeves pushed up just enough to look casual. The only color came from her earrings, garnet red, and her lipstick, which looked like it had been painted on with a surgical tool. She entered the brownstone with a practiced smile and a knowing flick of her eyes toward me. You're persistent, Mr. Goodwin, and you're punctual, Miss Kelton. Mr. Wolfe is waiting. Isn't he always? She followed me into the office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk, his bulk composed and his gaze implacable. She gave him a nod that might have passed as respect if it hadn't been so clipped. Mr. Wolfe. Miss Kelton. Sit. She did, legs crossed, back straight. I assume, she said, you've asked me here to revisit a story that already has its villain. No, Wolfe said. I have asked you here to reveal the author. That hung in the air like steam over boiling water. She tilted her head. I'm not sure I follow. Then allow me to guide you, Wolfe said. We have uncovered new information. Information about the jar of cassia used to poison the pancake batter. It was not Elaine Vedder's, nor was it Hector Gill's. It belonged to Stephanie Ward. Mira didn't react, but the silence behind her expression had shifted. She brought it in by mistake. Wolfe continued. Weeks before the incident, she forgot it, and someone with both access and ambition took it, relocated it, used it. Not to kill, but to destabilize. Mira's lips curled faintly. So now Stephanie's the culprit. No, Wolfe said. She's the witness, the patsy, perhaps, but not the planner. And who is? You, Wolfe said, calmly, clearly. Her head tilted a few degrees more, like she was appraising a new artwork. That's a serious accusation. It is a logical conclusion. Wolfe replied. You inserted yourself into every part of this narrative quietly. You received Jonah's anonymous message. You encouraged his concern. You arrived early that morning, allegedly for a sales report, and left before prep began. That visit, we now suspect, was to verify the jar was in place. You never intended to poison anyone, only to fan the fire. I see, she said softly. So I'm a puppeteer now. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You are a strategist. You wanted control of the restaurant. You lacked legal standing to force Elaine out. So you created instability. You counted on Jonah's insecurities. You watched Hector's frustrations mount. And when the moment was ripe, you let them clash. You're suggesting I orchestrated an attempted poisoning. No, you orchestrated a performance. Wolfe said, you did not poison the batter. You only ensured the right powder was available. The right people were agitated. And that when it all boiled over, you were positioned to step in either as savior or buyer. Mira sat very still. I watched her. The way she didn't reach for her bag, didn't fidget, didn't blink. It was the calm of someone who knew a storm couldn't touch them because they had planned the rain. You have no proof, she said finally. We have motive, Wolfe replied. We have the jar. We have the message sent to you by Jonah at your prompting, no doubt. We have your financial positioning, your legal history, your private conversations with Elaine's competitors. That cracked her veneer. She looked at me. You've been following me. Wolfe doesn't follow, I said. He directs. I'm the one who follows. You spoke to Darren Tellon, she asked, incredulous. He spoke to us, I said. Told us you offered to rescue the restaurant after its next scandal. Said you were preparing a press release. Wolfe grunted. You had planned for every outcome except one. That Hector would taste his own sabotage. She stared at the floor now. Not ashamed, calculating. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. You did not poison the batter, he said. But you enabled it, and you gambled with lives for control. She looked up then, eyes sharp, lips pressed. I saw a failing business. She said, Elaine lost her edge. Jonah was flailing. Hector was toxic. I didn't light the match. I just made sure there was kindling. That may suffice in a corporate boardroom, Wolfe said, but not in a criminal court. She laughed softly. Are you threatening me with prosecution? I'm not threatening anything, Wolfe said. I'm presenting you with a choice. Miss Vetter will not press charges against Hector, but she is considering a full disclosure of this affair to her investors and legal advisors. You, Miss Kelton, would not fare well under scrutiny. Mira looked down again, this time slower. And what's my alternative? Wolfe's voice dropped to a nearly conversational tone. You withdraw all financial claims on Vetter House. You divest. You sign a document stating your exit was voluntary and final. You allow Elaine to retain her business intact. Mira considered. It one long, calculated moment. Then she smiled thin, ironic, cold. You're quite the tactician. Mr. Wolfe. He didn't reply. She rose slowly. Fine. I'll step aside. I've lost better investments than this. She turned to me. You'll send the paperwork? With pleasure, I said. She nodded once. Tell Elaine she should thank you. She just won a war she didn't even know she was losing. And with that, she left. The front door closed quietly behind her. I returned to the office. Wolfe was already reaching for his beer. So, I said, no courtroom finale, no handcuffs, just a signed document and a very expensive sulk. She'll recover, Wolfe said. People like her always do, but she'll think twice before attempting theater in my city again. I leaned against the wall. You think Elaine will be all right? She will need to rebuild. But the rot has been scraped away, and Hector will fade. As opportunists do. We sat in silence for a while, the room warm, still, strangely peaceful. Fritz entered a few minutes later with lunch pot roast and roasted turnips with thyme. The smell was honest and grounding, like something a sane world would make. As Fritz retreated, Wolfe picked up his fork. You know, Archie, he said between bites, the most dangerous ingredient in any kitchen isn't poison. It's ambition. It flavors everything. I reached for the beer. So do you plan to write that down? No, he said. It's not original, just correct. We ate in silence, outside. Spring finally cracked the clouds, and sunlight crawled across the brownstone's windows like a timid confession. Inside, justice had been served. And As always, lunch was hot. It's a strange thing. Wrapping up a case that technically never happened. No formal charges, no arrests, no front-page headlines, just a quiet shifting of gears, a resignation letter, and a brief flurry of documents couriered back and forth between brown envelopes and colder hands. No one involved really wanted the spotlight, which was just fine with Wolfe. He considered press coverage a contaminant, and police visits worse than mildew. But for me, the aftershocks were the real story. A mystery, once solved, doesn't just vanish. It lingers, like the scent of burnt sugar in an overused skillet. You can't always scrub it clean. You just wait for it to fade. It had been 3 days since Mira Kelton agreed under Wolfe's verbal scalpel to walk away from Vedder House and its future, a clean financial exit, a signed non-disclosure, and a hollow smile. The document she inked was now safely filed away in Wolfe's locked cabinet. Under C for cleverly cornered. Elaine Vedder hadn't called since, which didn't surprise me. She'd wanted the fire put out, not the ashes examined. I suspected she'd spend the next few months rebalancing her menus, apologizing to her regulars, and deciding whether to trust her own judgment again. Hector Gill had quietly resigned, citing stress and lingering medical issues. No one at the restaurant had asked questions. According to Steph, who'd sent me a thank you email that read more like a therapy session. He hadn't said a word to the staff on his last day, just packed up his knives and left before noon. Jonah Drake had kept his job barely. Wolfe had offered a brief and scalding note of character assessment, which I'd been instructed to read over the phone to Elaine. She'd reportedly sat in silence afterward, then told Steph to put Jonah on morning shift with no creative input until further notice, which, in restaurant language, might mean forever. And Mira, gone, vanished back into her sleek little world of curated critiques and passive investments. But not before sending Wolfe a bottle of aged Armagnac with a note that read, "To a mind sharp enough to slice ambition, enjoy with veal." Wolfe had sniffed it, declared it worthy, and shelved it without ceremony. I figured that was the closest he'd ever come to accepting a peace offering. But me, I still had one more loose end to tug. It started when I reread Jonah's anonymous message to Mira. We'd traced the number and knew he sent it, but the wording had always felt a little off. To clean, to direct. Jonah didn't write like that. I'd read his text messages. He used emojis. He had spelling blind spots. This note had no typos, no slang. Just a perfectly typed sentence about spice substitution in the cinnamon order at Vedder House. Something wasn't lining up. So I paid Jonah another visit. He met me at a coffee shop near the restaurant, still wearing his branded apron, but with a looser posture than the last time we'd talked. Maybe resignation, or maybe the relief that comes when someone else takes the bigger fall. I sipped my coffee and let him sweat for a minute. "Jonah," I said, "you remember that message you sent to Mira?" He winced. "Yeah, look, I already told. Relax. I'm not here to relight that fire. I just want to ask, did you write it yourself?" He blinked. "Of course." "Why?" "Because it doesn't sound like you." He frowned. I was trying to be careful, you know, serious, or someone helped you." He didn't answer. "Steph," I prompted. "She was the one who told you about Mira's contact, and she was the one who urged you to speak up." He stared into his coffee. "She didn't tell me to write it," he said finally. "She just suggested it. She said Mira would know how to handle it discreetly." "Did she type it?" "A beat. I dictated it." He muttered. "I was nervous. I didn't want it traced." She offered. I sat back. "So Steph composed the message, sent it from your phone, and never told Mira." He looked up. "You think she know?" I said. "I think she did what she thought was right, but she wasn't just covering for Elaine. She was steering the story." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "No," I said, "but someone did." I left him there. wondering whether doing the right thing had ever really entered the equation at all. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms, tending to his orchids, which meant I had a full hour before he'd entertain words again. I used the time to make a few calls cross-checking the Belcourt delivery schedules, Steph's recorded hours, and the restaurant's camera placements. What I found didn't surprise me. There'd been no footage of the office hallway on the morning of the incident, but there was footage from 2 days earlier when Steph, alone during inventory, had been seen entering Elaine's office, carrying a small jar. So she'd planted it. She hadn't poisoned anyone, hadn't written the recipe for disaster, but she'd arranged the props, positioned the actors, and stood back to watch the scene unfold. And when it didn't go quite the way she expected, she stepped in just enough to redirect suspicion, but not enough to stop the fall. By the time Wolfe rejoined me in the office, hands freshly washed and mood faintly aromatic, I had the evidence lined up in a manila folder. I placed it on his desk. She didn't want to hurt anyone, I said. She wanted Hector out. She knew he was bitter. Maybe she thought she could force a mistake or set a stage. Mira was the bigger villain. But Steph opened the curtain. Wolfe leafed through the pages with slow fingers. She considered herself indispensable, he murmured, and when she wasn't recognized, she took control of the narrative. You think Elaine knows? No, Wolfe said, and she must not. Miss Vetter has endured enough betrayal, and Miss Ward will carry her guilt as intended. I frowned. You're letting her walk. I am, he said. We've removed the most dangerous player. The rest must live with what remains. He slid the folder into a drawer, locked it, and reached for his beer. And what remains, he added, is a kitchen that must relearn trust. I sat back. That's a quiet ending. It is the proper one, Wolfe said. Justice need not always thunder. Sometimes it simmers. We didn't talk much after that. Fritz served cold cucumber soup and toasted rye with lox. Wolfe, satisfied with the temperature and texture, grunted in approval. I let the silence stretch, the case filing itself away in my mind, undercomplicated but closed. After lunch, Wolfe looked up from his napkin. You've been restless, he said. This affair has left a distaste. I don't like it when no one gets what they deserve. They seldom do, he said. The world is not a dish balanced with fair ingredients. I shook my head, smiling. No, but every once in a while, it ought to be. He nodded, finishing his beer. Then he closed his eyes. In the meantime, Archie, he said, we eat. And with that, the brownstone returned to its rhythm, quiet, precise, and perfectly seasoned. The brownstone had settled into its natural state of inertia by the end of the week. The orchids thrived. Fritz's sofals rose to their usual ecclesiastical heights, and Wolfe returned to the safety of his books, where logic ruled and people did not interrupt unless summoned. For most, that might have been an anticlimactic close. For Wolfe, it was utopia. But as for me, I wasn't quite ready to shelve the whole affair. Something about it still stuck like a flake of scorched batter on an otherwise clean skillet. Because here's the thing they don't tell you in detective school, assuming there's such a place. The facts may fit neatly, the villain may fold politely, and the chessboard may be cleared without tipping the pieces. But people don't reset so easily. The aftermath sticks, and in this case, it clung like the scent of cheap cassia. I took a walk to Vetter House the following Friday afternoon, unannounced. Wolfe didn't object. He'd finished lunch suckling pig with roasted figs and had retired to the plant rooms. In the mood for orchids and silence, I took advantage of the lull and slipped out, deciding I needed to see the scene of the crime once more, if only to confirm it had gone back to being just a breakfast joint. The rain had finally taken a break, and New York's spring had moved in with breezy smugness. I reached Midtown in 20 minutes flat, walked past two brunch queues and a sidewalk cellist, and stepped inside the pancake pantry. It looked the same reclaimed wood walls, Same spotless counter, same framed chalkboard menus with names, like Flapjack Fantasia and Blueberry Regret, but the energy had shifted. The smiles from staff were real this time, not painted over suspicion or fatigue. The air had calmed, though something hung behind it, like a scar under foundation. Elaine Vetter spotted me the moment I walked in. She was by the back counter, looking over inventory sheets with the forced focus of someone pretending everything was completely normal. Her eyes caught mine, and she straightened. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "didn't expect you." "I didn't expect to be here," I said, "but I thought I'd check on the survivors." She smiled faintly. "That's what we are, isn't it? Survivors. You want coffee only if it's not spiced with ambition." That got a real laugh. She poured 2 cups behind the counter and led me to a small table near the kitchen doors, out of earshot but close enough that you could smell cinnamon if you tried. We sat, and I watched her face. Less makeup today, fewer defenses, but still alert, the kind of calm that comes after a controlled burn. "Business recovering?" I asked, steadily. She said, "Mira's departure didn't rattle the regulars as much as I thought. Once we told people she was stepping away to focus on other ventures, there were more sighs of relief than anything, and the staff," she sipped her coffee. "Hector's gone. That helped. Staff's quieter than usual. I think she blames herself. Does she know?" She met my eyes. "About Mira, about the jar." I let the silence answer. "No," she said. "And I'm not asking. You don't want to know. I already do. But saying it out loud won't fix anything. She's still the only person who stayed up with me during our first flood. Still the one who kept the lights on when the gas line broke. If she made a mistake or let someone else, she's paying for it every day she walks in here and looks me in the eye. That was better than I expected. And Jonah, he's trying, still insecure, still clueless with anything involving flavor. But I've put him on prep. He's safer there, less to ruin." I grinned. High praise. We drank for a moment in silence. "You know," she said finally, "when I hired Mira, I thought she was a lifeline. She had connections, money, presence. I thought if I could just keep her happy, I could breathe again. She strikes a lot of people that way." Elaine's fingers tightened around the mug. She made me doubt myself, slowly, quietly, the way she phrased things. Compliments that were actually critiques, praise that came with a price. She wanted to own this place in spirit. Before she owned it on paper, she didn't get it. I said. "No," Elaine said. "You stopped her. Wolfe did. I just asked the questions." She nodded. "Still, thank you." I shrugged. "It's what we do. People bring us their tangles. Wolfe sits, thinks, and I get the blisters." She smiled. "Worth it, usually." I said, "This one, maybe." We finished our coffee, and I stood. She followed me to the door, stopping me before I left. "One last thing," she said. "You know, after everything, we went back through the pantry inventory. Steph found a second jar of cassia, unopened, from the Vermont supplier." I raised a brow. "Wasn't on any recent invoice," she said. "No idea how long it had been there, but it was in the back, on the top shelf, hidden. Interesting. Made me wonder," she added, "if someone brought it in, not to use, but to replace. Maybe Mira was planning something bigger, or maybe someone else was and just got interrupted." I didn't answer. I just nodded. We shook hands, and I walked out into the street. I didn't tell Wolfe about the second jar. Not yet. He wouldn't approve of withholding information, but he would have understood the instinct. Some cases resolve with a bang, others with a whisper, and then there are the ones that leave a single note ringing long after the orchestra's packed up. Back at the Brownstone, Fritz was preparing dinner, beef ragout with rosemary polenta, and Wolfe was once again in his chair, reading a biography of Brillat-Savarin for the 4th time. I stepped into the office and took my usual seat. "Everything at Vetter House is calm," I said. No more sabotage. No one smuggled a knife in a crepe. Elaine sends her thanks, Wolfe grunted. She also found a second spice jar, unaccounted for. Might mean nothing, or that we missed a layer. Of course we missed a layer, Wolfe said without looking up. Life is layered. So are crimes, even simple ones. You want me to dig? No, he said. Let it rest. If more truth wishes to emerge, it will, I nodded. You think Mira will try again? No, he said. She lost the game, and she knows it. What about Steph? She will do her penance, quietly, sometimes, Archie. The fear of being found out is more effective than any verdict. He closed the book and picked up his beer, and sometimes, he added, a man must accept that the oven will always hold some warmth, even after the fire is out. I smiled. That was almost poetic. Phooey, he said, and drank. The clock ticked. The ragout simmered. Outside, the city rumbled along, and inside the brownstone, another case was done not with applause or arrest, but with a quiet, seasoned truth. Just the way Wolfe liked it. The brownstone had settled into its post-case rhythm, like an old dog resettling on its favorite cushion. No more clients at the door, no spice jars under suspicion, no cryptic notes slid under office doors, just the familiar smell of thyme from the kitchen, the low hum of Wolfe's afternoon radio, and the tap of my own fingers on a fresh case log I didn't yet feel like writing. It was Saturday. Wolfe, of course, was in his chair, encased in one of his favorite charcoal gray suits, holding a copy of Le Menagier de Paris with one hand and a glass of beer with the other. He wasn't reading anymore, just thinking. In that curious trance where he looked half asleep, but was probably reconstructing the Napoleonic wars in his head. I was on the couch, jotting final notes. We'd closed out the Vetter House affair, with no bodies, no sirens, and no headlines. But make no mistake, it was one of the most layered pies Wolfe had ever sliced into. Do you know what was most dangerous about this case? Wolfe asked without looking up. I'd say the ambition levels, I replied, or the cassia. Both had bite. He sniffed. The misdirection, not from the guilty, but from the innocent. Steph Ward misled us not with lies, but with omissions. Jonah with clumsy honesty. Mira with elegant silence, Hector with cowardice, Elaine with pride, all blind spots. Yes, Wolfe said, and each of them, in their way, constructed a maze around a very simple truth, which was that fear, Wolfe said, makes conspirators of us all, even the well-meaning. He set the book aside. Mira believed she could manipulate chaos without consequence. Steph believed she could stage correction without harm. Hector believed he could incite change without exposure. None of them intended a full collapse, but none of them cared who might be caught in the rubble. And yet, I said, they all ended up exposed in different ways. Wolfe nodded. That is the purpose of investigation, not merely to punish, but to reveal. Justice is sometimes dull, Archie. It comes without gavel or jail. But it clarifies, and when people see clearly, they change. Maybe, I said. Some people do, and the rest, they become future clients. Wolfe actually smiled at that. A real one. It vanished quickly, but I caught it. I leaned back. You know, you never really said what gave Mira away. I did, he said. She moved too early. The message Jonah sent her, it was orchestrated, yes. But Mira's response was prepared before she received it. She'd already contacted Belcourt about the cassia. The timeline exposed her, not her confession. She played both ends of the kitchen, I said. Precisely. And Steph, Wolfe's tone softened. She tried to avert damage, but her method was passive deceit. She'll carry that longer than punishment. We sat in silence, a kind of full, contemplative silence I'd come to appreciate more after every case, when the echoes of ambition and betrayal still hovered faintly, but the truth had been set down like a dish cooling on a windowsill. Then Fritz entered with a flourish. "Truffled egg salad," he announced. On pain au lait, Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, in either gratitude or anticipation, possibly both. As he rose, I followed him to the dining room, where the table was already set. Water gleaming in crystal glasses, mustard served in a cut glass. Bowl like it deserved its own tribute. We ate in silence for several minutes. Then Wolfe, not lifting his eyes from the plate, said, "Do you think Elaine will survive?" "Sure," I said. "The business may be even better now, but she'll think twice before trusting anyone again." "She must," Wolfe said, "but not too much. A restaurateur who trusts no one ends up serving nothing but suspicion." And that was his closing statement. No speeches, no lectures, no final flourish. Just a clean, sharp sentence served with egg salad and moral clarity. I didn't say anything more. I just finished my sandwich, watched the rain start again outside, and let the silence do what silence does best, which is to say, let the truth, at last, digest.